Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's been a long time. We wondered if it would happen again, but alas, we're back. And we wouldn't have it any other way. Welcome to episode 3 of Vandals. I'm your host, Esports Doug, and I have the pleasure of announcing somebody who's been in the news quite a lot in the last 12 hours, maybe. The newest officially signed member of C9, Josh Shinobi, Abastado. Josh, how you feeling, man?
Feels pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. All things considered, the whole global pandemic and not being able to leave the house or do much
Yeah.
of anything certainly dampers things. But alas, there's I'm glad to be here. I know that you and I have talked about this episode. We've talked about the
hmm
show for we were chatting about it before we went live. It's been what, 2 months, I believe, is what we
Yeah.
settled on.
So give or take a little bit. Yeah. Around there, I would say.
A long time coming, but we've made it finally. Through all trials and tribulations, we have made it here. Now, Josh, there's a ton to talk about. Obviously, one of the most pressing things being what's been in the news today regarding you and Cloud9. But one of my goals with Vandals is to ultimately bring the viewer closer to you personally, right? Like I want like folks who are watching from home, folks who are going to watch us on YouTube later, to watch this video and walk away as fans of Josh and ultimately to walk away as fans from Cloud9. So, in my opinion, one of the best way to do that is to get to know Josh, to get to know you on more of a personal level. So, I like to start you off nice and easy, warm you up a little bit. Think of this like Hot Ones, but without the hot wings and the glasses of milk and the sweating and the memes that come with it. But let's start from the top. Tell me a bit about you, your background. Where are you from?
Yeah. So I've grew up in Southern California. I've lived here my entire life, pretty much. Um, yeah, I've always been a gamer. I would say since I was a kid. I did the whole like skateboarding shit, and yeah, did did some things, played some sports when I was younger, back in like middle school, early high school, but
Sure.
mostly always just focused on gaming and you know technology stuff.
Sure.
So hasn't really been new. Definitely grew up playing games my whole life.
Well, like tell me a bit more about that, right? Because I can think, man, as far back as I can remember. I remember my dad when I was a little kid playing Mario on the original
hmm
NES, and I have like very vivid memories of everyone being asleep, if you will,
hmm
and him just being up grinding Mario over and over. So that was some of my earliest exposure. But tell me for you personally, how did you get into gaming? What was the first game you even remember playing?
So I definitely remember watching my dad. He was playing like Super Mario Brothers on like the Super Nintendo, and he would play like that and like the whatever the Zelda game was. I don't even remember. Like way back when I was like 2 or 3 years old. Um, I think the first like actual like FPS game that I played was actually Rogue Spear back in like
Oh
1999,
wow.
2000. I was like 5 years old playing on like a booster seat with like a no, it was like a I didn't have an actual chair, so it was like a like one of those bar stools,
Yep. Yep.
and I was just playing on like a huge like old CRT monitor. My mom actually played, and it was like on this like MSN Zone. It was like a gaming network thing that
Oh
people
my
used to use like
gosh,
way back in
dude.
the day. Yeah. So I was like, that was like probably the first like shooting game that I played
Mm,
that I was like, I wasn't very good. I was like 5 years old,
right.
but
Right.
um, and then when I was like 10 or 11, um, one of my friends that I knew growing up, he was like a little bit older than me. He was like
Mm.
14 or 15. He got a new computer and he was playing Counter Strike Source. And I went over to his house and I remember playing it for the first time, and I was just like instantly addicted to the game, just
Yep.
hooked, like had to play it. So as soon as I went home that day, I begged my dad to go and buy me a computer, and then from there I was just addicted to playing Counter Strike from that moment.
So gaming has always been like a family affair, it sounds like, right? Like you talked about your dad and
Yeah.
even your mom playing for a long time.
hmm
Did that kind of help in your transition and entry into the space?
I mean, my parents were definitely like really supportive.
Mm.
They didn't like hold me back from as long as I was getting my schoolwork done and I
Right.
had some sort of like fallback plan. That was really their biggest thing because at the time when I got into esports and playing professionally, the scene was not like how it is now. So there
Mm,
wasn't like a lot of infrastructure. There wasn't as much money.
hmm.
So from that perspective, I definitely I'm thankful that they pushed me in the right direction and were like, look, we wanted to support you with what you do, but it's also not aimless. Like you're not just putting all this time in
Right.
for naught, pretty much. So,
Right. Right. Right.
but in general, they were really supportive. They didn't ever prevent me from wanting to pursue this dream, I guess you could
Mm,
say.
hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, like gaming's always been a big thing. All my friends played games. Growing up, played COD, played Gears of War, like all
Yeah.
the big games. But yeah, I don't know. It's just always been like a big part of my life. So I never really, I guess I never really thought about it as being different or unique. But I guess it is. It's not really
Yeah.
something that a lot of people can say that they get the opportunity to do. So
No, and I would even go so far as to say not just having the opportunity, but some of the support. You hear so many countless people who are like my parents kept telling me to quit wasting my time and to quit playing video games and all of the generic go outside and
yeah,
do
no, for sure.
read a book or whatever. So I will
Hmm.
say, and even again from like my own personal experience wasn't anything like that. So it's super dope. I always get fired up when I hear parents that are like,
Hmm.
yeah, dude, you love gaming. You're good at it too. Honestly, even if you suck at it, but you love it, go do it. Like we've got
Yeah.
your back. But tell me a bit about this. So you start playing Source. You're 11 years old. You go over to your buddy's place and you're instantly hooked. You go home and like,
Hmm.
Dad, I need a PC. I need to play
Yeah.
Source. You probably, unless you were some prodigy at the age of
Hmm.
11, you probably still sucked at 11,
Oh
right?
no,
Like,
definitely.
tell
Yeah,
tell me
I was
more.
not good. Yeah. Well,
Well,
I just remember like the computer I had. So I went and got the game. Like I had no idea about anything like how computers worked at that
right,
time. Rightfully, I was a kid, but
right.
I remember I like told my dad before even getting the computer, we went and got the game, and I just remember playing on like the ultra low, like the lowest settings possible on like
Right.
640 by 480 resolution,
Holy.
and like I remember playing like CS Office. I don't know why I remember this so vividly, but like the FPS was so bad that when I shot the windows, they didn't even have like a animation for braking. It was just like white lines in the windows because my FPS was so bad. And that was when I was just like, yeah, this like I can't play like this. Like, my friend's game doesn't look like this. His game looks amazing. I was like, I need to get a new. And I got like some shitty like Westinghouse monitor that was like
Yep.
all just awful, and I used that for so long, even when I was playing Source at like a relatively high level, like playing ESEA main and like
Right.
CBO professional at that time, which was like not really professional at all.
Right.
But yeah, I played that for a long time, and then I played COD 2 as
Mm,
well. I stopped playing Source and played COD 2 competitively for that was probably my first game I actually played like really competitively, and it was some people that I actually met in COD that told me about Cal, uh, and
mhm,
then that led me to
mhm.
playing Source at a competitive level, like way back in like 2007. I want to say 2006, 2007, somewhere in there. But I was still really young. I was like 13 at that time.
So you're 13 years old, you're a couple years in, and
Hmm.
you obviously you got better, right? Over those 2 years. You hit
Yeah.
13, 14 years old, and your buddies are like,
Hmm.
hey, Josh, you may have something here. There may be something to this. What was that like?
Hmm.
Did you believe them? How much did you even know about the esports space at the time? Like, were you thinking that this could be a career?
Honestly, even going into when it was on my first like professional team, which was like the denial team that I played with in
Hmm.
CS:GO, I never like ever thought like, hey, I'm pretty good. Like I can make something out of this. It was always just like I had fun playing the game,
Mm,
and because I had fun, I was just like consumed by like a lot of my time just because
hmm.
I enjoyed it. It wasn't like obviously I knew like, hey, I'm better than like the average player,
Right.
but it never crossed my mind of like I really want to go pro. Like some people when they play a game, they're like, I want to be pro. Like that's like my goal.
Right.
And I guess like in hindsight, like I guess like thinking back, like retrospectively, I guess is like I never had that same mentality. I just kind of like once it happened, it was like I loved competing over
Mm,
anything else. So then like the drive to be a competitor was really what made me want to continue in pursuing being a professional player. But that was never like the thought that came in my mind initially until it like actually just kind of happened.
Right.
Um,
So you touched a bit on the competitive side of things and
mhm.
how that drives you personally.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how the competitive space has impacted you on a holistic scale. How has competing shaped Josh in a sense?
I mean, I guess one of the biggest thing is like being I wasn't always an in-game leader. It was kind of something that I just became out of like a necessity.
Yeah.
And I think competing and playing professionally definitely builds like it sounds kind of like cliche to say, but it definitely builds character. Like you become a more
Mhm.
well-rounded person from gaming. Like I also like I played sports and I did other things like outside of just like I wasn't always just like playing games like 12
Mhm.
hours a day. Like there was a period of time where I quit playing entirely for like 2.5 years, like when I was in high school. Um,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of the skills, like a lot of the things you learn from playing just in a team setting in general, I think is really important. Whether that's like playing basketball or competing in an esports team.
Right.
Um, I think all of those things are important, but I think gaming definitely just shaped my character as a person. Like I wouldn't be who I am today without it. Again, like as
Yeah.
cliche as that is to say, but I think you learn a lot. Like working with people that you might not get a lot. Like you don't always get along with everyone that you work with, whether
Yep.
it's in a job,
Anywhere
competing
really.
in a
Yeah.
team,
Yeah.
yeah, anywhere, any space. And I think you learned how to work with different personalities and really like, especially as an in-game leader, how to
Mhm.
maximize the pieces that you have in a team
Hmm.
and really ensuring that you're working to the best of your ability. That's definitely a skill that I've developed over the years. And then I would also say, from like an individual character standpoint, I was like when I was coming up in the scene and Go, I was like more of just like a run around aim star, which like
Yep.
you wouldn't think of
Yep.
me as a player now. You think I'm like a
Nope.
definitely a supportive player, more cerebral. But when I was coming up, it was like a lot of just run around. I was like really cocky, and I would definitely say I was arrogant. Like I thought I was like the best player,
Yep.
and I would just like talk shit in scrims, and I was just like a not a good person in general. But I think
Hmm.
that's a lot of things that I see people when they're young, like 18, 17, 18.
Mhm. Mhm.
They don't have like the social skills or understanding of like how what you have to be, professional, not just in your performance, but also in how you present yourself as a
Mhm.
person. I think that's really important, and that's something I've learned over the years, competing
Yeah.
since way back.
Now tell me this, Josh.
Hmm.
Let's pretend for a moment that you are not the IGL for a tier one esports
Okay.
organization in North America for the hottest esports title um, in probably not the entire world, probably half the United States. Let's pretend for a minute that that's not you.
Sure.
What what does life look like? Right? What are you doing if not esports? What's Josh doing today if not for esports?
So I probably would have I probably have my degree finished already if I didn't do gaming. I took a lot of time off from school to compete and pursue this. But I probably just be working some like job that I not super stoked to
Mm-hmm.
be in.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean I really couldn't tell you. It's been a part of my life for so long. Like I really wouldn't know where I would be without it. It's definitely given me like a I wouldn't say it's given me purpose, but it's definitely given me like a some sense of direction, and
Yeah.
it's source of income for me for sure. So it's I don't really know what I would do. I mean I'm sure, like I said, my parents were really they push having a backup plan and having making sure that you're not
Right.
all inning on something that's very risky. It's
Right.
not a lot of cases it's not sustainable, and I've had definitely periods of
Mm-hmm.
time where I wasn't making any money from playing games. So I think that um, what they instilled in me is definitely important, and I wouldn't be lost. Like I would still have a job and I'd be doing things, but
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't be ideal. Like I much
Right.
prefer to do this as long as I can, and I
Right.
think
Right.
most people would agree with that sentiment for sure.
Right. Yeah, I'd say so. Now tell me this. So you mentioned CS early on. You talked about competing in that space.
Hmm.
Tell me about what things look like for you prior to Valorant. From what I understand, there were a couple of breaks involved. Tell me a bit about
Hmm.
that.
So So I guess the last team I really competed, well, we can go back a little bit. So the last like pro team that I played under was Rogue. That was back in like 2018.
Mm.
And then after I played on Rogue, I coached Dignitas, their NA squad, for like 11 months, 10, 11 months. And then at that point, like after Rogue, I basically was like, I'm done with competing. I don't want to be a player anymore. I'd much rather coach. Um, didn't
Well,
really enjoy like a lot of the stress that was involved because a lot of my career when I was playing was like a lot of roster problems and things that were like really out of my control.
mhm,
Um, every season that I played in pro was just like kind of it was disastrous. Obviously, like I take accountability for some of that, but there
mhm,
were certain things that were out of my control, like org problems,
mhm,
roster
mhm,
restrictions, things like this. Just kind of took the will out of me to compete,
mm,
and coaching was something fresh. And then after I coached that team, because Peter and Mitch were, Pete's someone I played with for a really long time,
mhm,
um, and they asked me if I wanted to play because they needed an in-game leader after the team kind of fell apart, and so they kind of talked me back into playing. So I got a computer
mhm,
and I played with them for the better part of a year on Bad News Bears. That was like the last actual team I played on,
mhm,
and then after that team, uh, I was kind of done. Like I didn't really care too much about being a player at that point. My drive and like I said, my drive in CS was already kind of like diminished. I didn't have any will really to be a player in CS anymore.
mm,
Um, after that, I did some analytical work. I helped this org, Rise Esports. They're like a upcoming team in NA,
mhm,
the lower tier, but they're really good dudes, and I really, I was appreciative that they reached out to me, and it was really fun working with those guys. It was less stress. I got to, it was not a full time thing.
right.
Um, that slowly kind of brought back my desires as a competitor, just like working with super hungry guys that were just like eager to want to get better. And then, I heard about Project A, like for it was like kind of like in the back end, like
Mhm,
hearing, though there's this Riot FPS game coming out, but I didn't really think anything of it. And
mhm,
then once I got the beta for Valorant, I was hooked. I really liked the game a lot, and it reinvigorated that like desire to want to be a competitor again. So that's kind of where we are now, I guess.
and it certainly seems to be paying off, in
Yeah,
every sense of the word. Let's talk about Cloud9, right?
sure.
Cloud9 comes onto the scene. They sign tens. It's tens and friends. People are talking about the guys that are playing
Hmm.
around tens, and are these guys signed? Are they not signed? Like who are these guys? There were talks for a while about who your new fifth is going to be, and the Cloud9 story has actually, to be honest with you, has been one of the most fascinating ones to watch in the
Hmm.
brief era of Valorant because of some of the things that I just mentioned. So give me the scoop.
Hmm.
Talk to me from the inside. How'd you get connected to Cloud9?
Hmm.
What was it like to play for them for months as an IGL while not being signed? And can tell me a bit
Hmm.
more about that.
So it's like way back in April.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tens had he messaged me and he asked me like, you know, h- what do you think of Valorant? I'm still with C9 because he at this point he was already benched with the CS team, but he
Mm-hmm.
knew that they wanted him to build a team for Valorant. So I'd been talking to him, uh, back and forth, and we played together for a long time. So I know that he knows like what kind of system I implement as a caller and kind of my style, and he like recommended me basically. And before this, I was already talking to Charlotte Phoenix at the time about putting a team together for them.
Hmm.
Um, but obviously, if an offer from C9 comes, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
more lucrative. Definitely something that I'm not gonna really turn down. It's nothing against them. Those guys they're all really good dudes,
Yeah.
and I actually, they're really. I enjoyed playing with them actually a lot, but it's not the same
Right.
as playing with C9. So
Mm-hmm.
once I talked to Tens and he was pretty sold on the idea of bringing me in as the caller, I spoke to some people from C9, and from that point, I wouldn't say I had control at all. Obviously, it was like it's definitely a collective effort when it came to putting the roster together. But we tried out a lot of people. This was from the very beginning. You're trying out different players, kind of seeing who fits in with the team, which from the outside looking in, it seems strange because this whole time, people were thinking like, oh, he's not signed. What's going on here? Is he playing? But um, uh, without getting into too much detail, C9 definitely they took care of me in the time.
Mm.
It was not for nothing. So a lot of the team building process was, me talking to a lot of management, getting the right pieces together. Originally we had Infinite on the team, which was
Mm-hmm.
someone that I
Mm-hmm.
vetted pretty heavily. Worked with him as well on teams in the past in CS. He was a amazing player, but he just had no desire to really want to play Valorant. He
Mm-hmm.
just did not like the
Mm-hmm.
game and the direction that he felt it was going. So, we parted ways with him. I would say at that time when it was me, Mitch, Skylar, Infinite, and Tens, I felt like we were comfortably the best team in NA.
Mm.
We definitely at least showed that we had the potential to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then once Infinite left the team, we kind of were in this like weird state where
Right.
we were not progressing basically because we just did not have a 5-man lineup at that point.
Right.
So, teams grinded, they got a lot better and we kind of stagnated.
Mm.
So we didn't deserve to be like one of the best teams if we're not putting in, not to say that we weren't putting in work because we were playing like 6, 7, 8 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very hard to, it's
No,
very
no.
hard to like move, like you're always moving, one step forward, two steps backwards
Yep.
because you're changing players out, you're changing roles. Like when we first started, I was playing Sage, I was playing Breach, I was playing Cypher.
Mm-hmm.
We tried out every possible combination of agents until we kind of landed on this mix now that we feel really comfortable with. And I think that's also evident in Mitch's uptick in performance. He's been playing
Mm-hmm.
great on stage. So I think it was just a lot of trial and error and things that other teams they kind of got their stuff together and they were clicking and we were still kind of figuring ourselves out. So we kind of fell a bit behind, but now I think that we're where we should be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think I don't think there's any. It's safe to say or fair to say that anyone is like the best right now because I think that the scene is really up in the air. There's a lot of really good teams and uh, matchups and compositions I think matter a lot more than people think about,
Mm.
and I think it plays a big role in who's better than who right now. It's pretty even, I would say. I don't think there's a definitive like best team. I think it's safe to say that we're one of the better ones,
Mm.
but we could still lose to anybody. Like we played Renegades in the group stage of PAX, and they surprised us on split, and they owned us. Um, and I think we play that match 10 times. I think like it can go both ways. I don't
Sure.
think it's super cut and dry.
Mm-hmm.
So
With all of that in
yeah.
mind, because I think it was, and you're gonna have to refresh my memory on who the roster was.
Mhm.
I believe it was Infinite who was the fifth for you guys when you
Mhm.
first played in that Elite Esports
Yes.
rivalry bowl, which is where you and I
Correct. Yeah.
met.
Correct.
Uh, I would absolutely. You guys seemed like you were head and shoulders above almost anything North America had to offer at
Yeah.
the time. So like, yeah, as a bystander, as an outsider looking in, kind of seeing how this has evolved so much, to see Cloud9 go from that, or
Mhm.
well, I guess Tens and Friends at the time, go from that
Yeah.
to what it is now and everything that has come in between. We're gonna go back to this because I want to hear more of your thoughts around power rankings and where you think Cloud9 fits and
Okay.
and things like that. But
Mhm.
before we get to that, I do want to touch base on this. So if I'm hearing you correctly, this
Mhm.
Cloud9 signing has been what, months in the making, maybe
Yeah.
6 weeks in the making. How good does it feel to finally get this off of your chest and get it out there? Like you slap the C9 in front of Shinobi. How does that feel?
No, it feels good for sure. A lot of the I without going into too much detail, the
Yeah.
reason was a lot of it had to do with Infinite leaving the team.
Hmm.
Delayed a lot of things, so it made more sense from the Oryx perspective to layer out the announcements
Hmm.
because we were still figuring out our team. It doesn't make like it made sense not to just be like, oh, here's our team, and then 2 weeks later, oh, just kidding, it's
Right.
actually
Right.
only four of them.
Hmm.
So yeah, it builds anticipation as well. It's it's nothing. I was never in fear or anything of that sort
Right.
because I knew what was going on. I was
Hmm.
never like in the dark about it or anything. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, it definitely feels good to finally be like, all of the behind the scenes stuff finally being like, hey, I'm on C9
Yeah.
officially. It
Yeah.
feels good for sure.
Well, you just got to slap that blue check mark next to your name next. But
Hopefully soon. Yeah.
all right, let's talk Cloud9 in a
Okay.
more official setting. Let's talk Cloud9. How good are you guys? How much potential is left? Yeah. Talk to me about Cloud9. Talk to me about this team relative to North America, relative to the TSMs of the world, the
Mhm.
Sentinels. Tell me a bit about that.
I mean, yeah, I think we're a good team. I don't think we're anywhere near the level that we can be or we will be. Obviously as the game progresses, so will all
Hmm.
the teams. Everyone's just going to naturally get better. But I think that our skill ceiling is really high, and I think people really underestimate like how deep our lineup is. People, obviously Tens is insane, and he's probably the best player in the world, and I really don't think that's debatable. I wouldn't say he's the best player. I think that there's to be the best player, you have to be also the most complete player, which I
Yep.
think, he needs more time. He's still really young too. He's only 19. I think that's something he needs to develop in his game, but impactful, definitely, and mechanically, for sure the best in my opinion.
Hmm.
Um, and he just does, I don't know, he just does things that no one else can do, and it's like the things I see him do in and out, like just in practices and matches, it's honestly ridiculous. Like I've never seen someone and that was even back in CS when I played on a team with him. It's just the things this guy does is just like out of this world. Um, they don't really make sense, but they just always work. Um, and but besides that, I think a lot of the thing is like people think that our team is like not as skilled as some of the other teams, and they think a lot of it is like Tyson leading the charge, and
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
definitely does frag really hard, but
Hmm.
our system is definitely in play to make sure that he can do these things, and we're trying to play in a way where we are enabling him to,
Hmm.
if he makes mistakes or he overextends, we're not just instantly going to lose the game because of it. We understand kind of like the risk reward of having a player like that, and I also think we're like an advantage that we have is that we actually have an in-game leader, and I would
Hmm.
say that we're really adaptable. Like we don't any team we play, I feel like we're really good at adapting and adjusting. I can't say always because we're human and we're gonna
Right.
make mistakes. It's a learning process, but um, I think that our play style is like we're pretty unique. I think we're running a lot of agent. Like we were one of the first teams for sure that was running Jet consistently,
Yep.
and we were playing Viper in the beta, and we're definitely open minded to playing unorthodox comps. Like I think we didn't really find a lot of success doing it, but we were also one of the first teams to play a Sage's comp.
Uh
We
huh.
were running a lot of like breach and weird like agent pools, like
Hmm.
um. But in general, I think that we have a good mix of players. We have a lot of experience. We've all played together before on teams, so there's like a level of chemistry that I think a lot of other teams might be lacking. Not to say that they can't build chemistry in the long run,
Right.
but
You're ahead of the game there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yep.
And I don't know. I think in general, I think we have like all the right pieces to be a really good team. Like we have a complete lineup, in my opinion.
Hmm.
I think you know we just have to keep playing. Like that's the biggest thing. It's just grinding and constantly trying to improve. Like
Hmm.
we don't really care what other people think about us, we don't really care like what other teams are doing. Like we're more focused on ourselves and being the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And if we're doing that, I feel like we're setting ourselves up for success in general.
That's a championship mindset. You touched on tens, you
Hmm.
touched on the love that he gets, and he does get a lot of love, as he should.
Yeah,
He's probably the most exciting person to watch play Valorant in general, in my
yeah, no,
opinion.
for sure, for
Um,
sure.
but and you touched on something. I've actually had this conversation with some of my peers, and
Hmm.
this has been something that's come up on shows, and I think I actually mentioned this at the United charity event that you
Hmm.
guys played in. Tens gets a lot of love again, as he should, but there's
Hmm.
so much that seems like happens behind the scenes that it's not.
Hmm.
There are a lot of guys doing a lot of dirty work, and admittedly, you're one of
Hmm.
them. To allow
Yep.
some of this to happen, tell me more about the roles in particular. Like,
Hmm.
obviously, you're trying your best to set up your most mechanically
Hmm.
gifted player to shine, right? And that's that's cerebral in and of itself. But tell me a bit about more about the roles that you guys play individually and how that plays out.
Hmm. So, like, I think for me, I mean, I've said this since day one, since we were playing together. Like, I'm no issue. I'll play whatever agent we need. Like, if the meta shifts and people need to adjust their roles, like, I have no problem. I can do anything that's needed. You know, the biggest thing for me is making sure that my teammates are playing to the best of their ability, and I know that like my job as like the leader, I need to be setting them up for success as much as I can. I think there's definitely some scenarios where I think I might, as a detriment to myself, I might be thinking too much into that at certain times,
Hmm.
focusing too much maybe on my radar, just like worrying about what people are doing instead of focusing on myself, which I think, you know, when I watch back some of the games, I know exactly when it's happening. And I think that's like something, you know, to work on over time,
Right.
something I've always been trying to improve upon. But in general, you know, I'm definitely comfortable like in games when I'm not playing to the best. Um, you won't see me taking Vandals and doing these things. Like I'm taking pistols, I'm taking the
Hmm.
shit guns that
Hmm.
nobody wants. Like
Hmm.
I'm running out for my teammates. Like I'm not ever thinking like, you know, I gotta win the game. Like I know that if I set my teammates up, that they're gonna deliver for me,
Hmm.
and you know we're gonna win the game. So it's never. I think the thing too with our team though is that we all have this mindset of team first.
Hmm.
Like if I'm popping off in a game, no one's gonna be like, no, like what are you doing? Like blah blah
Give
blah.
the
Like it's
frags
not.
to tens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah. Yeah.
not, and we're not rigid either. I would say like roles in terms of like agents, I think are more strict. Like
Yeah.
people
Hmm.
kind of play to their comfort in that sense, but
Right.
we're definitely a flexible team. We're not like you're the lurker, you're the entry fragger. We
Right.
definitely are. Like I said, we're adaptable. We adjust things as needed, and I think having a guy like Vice in the team playing with us.
Hmm.
He has really, really good communication and he has a very good mind for the game. So I think having someone like that, that was something that we were missing, like when Infinite was no longer playing with us, just like a second voice.
Hmm.
And Skylar, I know Skylar gives a lot of input and he's definitely important as well. But you know, we needed that Cypher player or just like just a player in general who's really gonna, you know, give a lot of information and
Right.
you know try to also help read the game and you know again do more of the dirty work and things like that. And he's also, in my opinion, one of the most skilled players that I've played with.
Hmm.
Even though it might not always be reflected in the score, there's a lot more, especially in this game,
Yeah.
than what the frags show.
Yep.
Like, I mean, if you look at our matches stat wise, even in games when if I'm negative 15, I have 40 assists and I have literally 20 plus bomb plants in a best of three, where the next person on my team has three or four. Not to say that that's any sort of excuse. I take full, you know, I embrace the role. It's just like there's abilities in this game that straight up will kill you, and you don't have to get into a gunfight. Like there's things that happen in this game that you just have no control over,
Right.
like you would in CS.
Right.
I think the situations play out a lot differently, and yeah, I mean, just certain things have to be done and someone's got to do it. Like if no one does
Hmm.
it, then it's never going to get done. So it's just the way it is. And you know, I have no problems doing those things.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the thing too with like a guy like Tens is uh, he has literally no ego. Like this guy is probably, like I said, he's like the one of the best, probably the best player that I've played with from a mechanical standpoint. But this guy just has like no ego at all. He's very much like what if you tell him to do something, he'll do it, no questions asked. He's a really good teammate, and maybe a little bit to his detriment because he could maybe have a little more killer instinct and be like, no, like I'm gonna do this, like bend to my will a
Sure.
little bit. But he's a great kid, and I think having someone like that on the team is invaluable for sure. It's honestly amazing playing with someone like that,
With how
and
terrifying Tense can
yeah,
be, the thought of having him have more of a killer mindset. Like if
hmm,
he's already like dashing into sites, just trying to like
yeah,
1v5 off the back. Could
yeah,
you imagine with more with more
yeah.
confidence what that would look like?
No, but see that's the thing. He's super confident. He knows he's really good. It's just in a team environment, he's got like the perfect attitude. Like he's
Sure.
not, you know, he's very much like I said, he's team oriented.
Mhm.
Maybe not always reflected in his play. You know, he's definitely will overextend and you know go for the highlights and things like that. But
Right.
in terms of like respecting teammates and just in general doing what's needed for the team, he's never gonna give you like no, like I'm not gonna do that. I really want to do this or that. And I mean, when he wants to do something, I let him do it. And I call. I think one of the things with our team and why I think we function so well is that, like I said, I feel like we're really adaptable. And if someone has a read or they have an idea of how they want to play the round,
Hmm.
I'm not very stubborn and like, no, we need to do this or that.
Right.
I'll make the round around what someone thinks will work or what they know can be efficient in the round. So I think again, I think a lot of that comes down to as well having like an actual in-game leader
Yep.
who is reading the game and is not just calling strats. Like there's a lot more to being an in-game leader than just being a strat caller. That's
Right.
like
That's
not they're not
fundamentals.
really
Yeah.
they're not the same even
Right.
though people they use the terms interchangeably. They're not really the same thing.
Hmm.
I think that's important to note. But
Well,
yeah,
I,
like I said, it's to cover the roles. Like that's I would say the gist for how our team functions.
yeah. Well, and I think so much of that has to come with
Hmm.
trust, right? Like you as an IGL,
Yeah,
you
no,
have to
for
be able to
sure.
trust the guys around you if they have a read or they want to play
Hmm.
something like that. Again, just a testament to how well it seems that this team is put together and the chemistry
Hmm.
that's the foundation you guys are building off of, and that's what it seems like
Hmm.
Cloud9 continues to grow on as
Yep.
well. I want to shift a bit to the game itself. You
Sure.
you
Yeah.
mentioned you mentioned you guys played Viper early on in the beta. Um,
Hmm.
so I want to touch on that a bit. She has been what's the polite way to what's the polite way to put this? She's been less than
Not
good.
good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She hasn't been great for a long time.
Hmm.
Since the game came out really. She just went through quite a pretty thorough buff patch, and there are still rumors that she's going to get buffed even more.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on her? What are your thoughts on the op and the conversations that people
Hmm.
have around it's insanely overpowered and blah blah blah? What are your thoughts on those two in particular?
So in regards to Viper, uh, she's not okay. She's not awful. Like she's not a terrible agent by any means. I think there's definitely a lot of things that you can do with her, but I think her her appeal or what makes her good is actually more the fact that like if you use her efficiently, people are not ready to play against it.
Yep.
I don't think her kit is inherently good. I think it's more like the surprise factor or like you know there's certain things about the agent that you can do
Mm.
that make it difficult to play against because you can basically do info denial like
Mm-hmm.
multiple times throughout the round. But she's a very static agent, and I still think her ult is dog shit. Like there's really no other way to put it. Like
Mm-hmm.
they need to completely rework the ult. Like
Uh-huh.
like adding the extra duration outside of the ult, it doesn't make the ult that much better in my
Right.
opinion. Like
Right.
in theory it makes sense I guess, but uh, it's not again, it's not even that she's like awful. It's just that, they buffed Omen, they made Omen so much better. Like Brimstone is still good. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
just it's
Mm-hmm.
really hard in my opinion to work in a comp that uses Viper
Yep.
because as a controller, she's just not as good as Omen or Brim.
Mm-hmm.
She's very
Mm-hmm.
like not being able to pick up her wall is like I mean again, I don't know what they can do to make it where it's not just completely OP. I feel like that would just make her
Right.
busted if you could just do that, but there's certain things about her that like even a small change like where when you put down the Viper wall, you don't actually see like the little like
Yeah, the little
whatever those things are on the
pegs or
ground. It
whatever.
would
Yep.
be yeah, like just like with Omen, you don't see the direction of the smoke where it comes from.
Right.
If they did something like that, I think it would make the agent better because you can't just be like, oh, there's a Viper wall at B,
Right.
like watch out at B. Like
Right.
there's like a lot of I guess there's mind games that go involved in that, but it's not like good design in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the op, like the operator is definitely I think it's too strong in terms of like
Hmm.
the cost. Like I think it needs to be more expensive, but I don't think dealing with operas is like impossible. Like we run only one controller, I would say, on every map, right? But I think the way that we use Sova and kind of how we jiggle peak angles, we don't very often get punished by operas like a lot of these other teams where I see them just straight up walking into op angles and just getting owned. Like tens and Mitch, they have a field day against these teams when they want to peak them. They just dominate them with the op. And I think the thing with our team too is we don't really rely on the op. Like we're comfortable playing no op or playing these like people say cheese, I guess, but people like we have no problem playing these grimy rounds where we're buying shotguns and using daggers and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's part of our flair because we have a guy like Tens on our team who can
Mm-hmm.
make these weapons work because he's just insane. But we're not a team that's reliant on ops by any means, I would say.
Right.
And we're definitely like a scrappier team. Like we're willing to do the force buys and we're willing to get in people's faces. Like we're not afraid of ops and things like that. But I think we have a good understanding of how to deal with them with like the limited utility in the game. Not to say that I think it's like balanced by any means. Like I think there should be, or
Mm-hmm.
there. I hope that in the future there's going to be more agents that have more flexible kits that have more utility or bring more to the table. But you can't change it for the way it is now. You just have to
Right.
adapt. Really,
Right.
you can't. There's complaining about it doesn't actually help you in any way. You have to
Mm-hmm.
actually do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've done a pretty good job. I mean, you see with Sentinels as well. These guys are they straight up just don't run ops a lot either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from PAX to the last Ignition series, like how ops were super dominant in the first, and now you see
Yep.
two teams in the finals that just don't really play ops that much. Like I think it shows that the game is constantly evolving in terms of the meta, and I think you're gonna just continue to see that more. Ops might become more popular again. I wouldn't say that they're obsolete; they're still insane. The ops are
Mm-hmm.
broken in my opinion, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not they're like not impossible to handle.
Right.
I
And they
think there's
aren't.
definitely like workarounds.
Yeah, and they're not necessary to win. Right. Like I
Yeah,
think there are
for sure.
two sides to that coin that
Mhm.
you touched on that I think are incredibly important.
Mhm.
Let's talk. Speaking of Viper, let's talk Killjoy.
Mhm.
Right at this
Okay.
point, you've probably seen the trailer. If you haven't seen the trailer, go ahead, look it up. Killjoy is the newest agent that's going to be manning the battlefield in Valorant, and I obviously I haven't had my hands on her. She doesn't come out until next week, I believe, which is something that we'll talk about in a minute. But what are your thoughts on Killjoy right off the bat?
I mean, I have to honestly, I have to see her in action, like actually play her to really give like an opinion.
Sure.
From the video that I watched on it, it was like hard to really gauge like how good or bad the agent will be.
Hmm.
The turret looks really weak to me, but
Hmm.
I think there's something inherently broken about being able to just set up a crossfire with a turret by yourself.
Yeah.
Like things like
Yeah.
that is just like very strange to me in a tactical FPS game.
Hmm.
Um, like I had this like before I was talking to my teammates and I told them like it has to be a sentinel that they're adding to the game because of how often Sage and Cypher are picked. So it's like it made sense that this was the type of agent that they were going for.
Hmm.
I don't know how good it's gonna be in theory. If it works out, expecting the worst, she's gonna be insane. But
Right.
I have this feeling like she's gonna be niche. Like she'll be good on certain maps. I don't think she'll overtake Sage or Cypher in the meta where like you only see Killjoy on every team and there's no Cypher, there's no Sage. I think there's
Hmm.
definitely a place for both of those agents, barring any like crazy nerfs that happen.
Hmm.
But the agent definitely seems viable. I don't know if she's gonna be like a S tier agent or anything.
You'll see
Too
her more
early to
than
tell.
Viper, is what you're saying.
Probably, yeah, for sure. At least right now.
Sure. All right. With that in mind,
Hmm.
there is the whole releasing an agent a couple of days before a major $50,000 Ignition
Yep.
Series tournament. The patch itself is going to have changes. There have been people in the community who have been very expressive about that and
Hmm.
whether or not that should be the case. This also worth mentioning is not the first time something like this happens, that a major patch comes out just a
I
couple
mean,
of days
the
before.
last tournament was like this. It
Right.
happened the
Yeah.
day of. Yeah.
Right. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I don't think it sets a good precedent
Hmm.
that they're just gonna shove especially when it's their own tournament. Like I could understand if it was like a third party organizer that isn't
Right.
involved with Riot at all, but it's a Riot sanctioned event. Like
Right.
they're the ones that set up the event.
Calendar. Yeah.
They knew
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
dates. They knew the dates and events. It's not like it's shocking to Riot. So I
Right.
feel like it's poor judgment on their part. I would say for sure to just like shove an agent down, especially when we know from talking to the tournament organizers that like the agent is going to be in the tournament. Like there's nothing that they're going to do. So people can play
Hmm.
Killjoy. Like it'll be interesting to see kind of how the tournament plays out. But I think also that factor will definitely play a part in the results of the tournament. I wouldn't be surprised if they're wonky because of the update. Um,
And I mean
whether or not that works in our favor, we'll see.
that's
But
a tough pill to swallow, though, right? I mean, we're talking
yeah,
it's
it's
a 50,000. This is the biggest tournament North America's had,
mhm,
and we're talking
yeah,
about an agent potentially skew. I'm going to say potentially. I stick with potentially skewing
yeah.
the outcome here.
It's not a good look. I feel.
Hmm.
I mean, like I said before, with like the ops and things like that, it is what it is. You gotta
Sure, sure, sure.
adapt and deal with it. There's no point in dwelling on something that's out of your control. We know how it's gonna be, but I definitely don't think it's a good look for the game. Valve did this as well, playing
Hmm.
CS.
Hmm.
This is like common for
Yeah.
them, and I just hope that Riot don't follow in their footsteps because it was definitely not ideal.
Well, and you know this
Um,
the concerning thing is with Riot, you take like for League of Legends Worlds, this happens every year where there's a team that comes in hot because of the patch in the current meta. A patch is released,
mhm,
everything is flipped on its head. All of a sudden, you have like a wildcard team that makes it out of groups, and things like that happen. So it's admittedly a bit concerning,
mhm,
knowing that that's the case in League, knowing that that's not outside of the realms of normal when it comes to Riot. We'll see. We'll
mhm.
see how it plays out this weekend. Obviously, best of luck to you and
Thank
the
you.
guys, of course. One last thing when it comes to Ignition series, and then I do want to cut it over to um, folks that are I had there were people who asked questions for you on Twitter, and then obviously if
Mhm,
anyone in the chat has any questions, I want to leave a moment for that as well. But with Riot taking more of a hands-off approach and allowing other people to run tournaments, obviously they're involved with it being a sanctioned event series by them, and what have you. Um,
mhm,
some of the comments in the community have been there are just too many dang tournaments, right? Like
mhm.
there are conflicts for major tournaments. There's a tournament every single weekend. They're like, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? In your opinion, does this impact the other touchy subject, which has been
Mhm,
viewership? Hey, it was great this past weekend, but viewership for
mhm.
Valorant tournaments has been soft, right? Let's call it what it
Yeah.
is for a T1 esport. It's been
Mhm.
soft. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think with like the viewership, I think it's gonna grow. Like you already saw, 85K in the PAX finals.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not bad for sure. I think the viewership won't really be a problem. I think more tournaments are gonna have, more viewership as we continue to go. But just like I said, setting a bad precedent with like them forcing an update like the day or two before a major tournament.
Hmm.
Originally, when they announced the Ignition series, they said like one Ignition tournament a month,
Hmm.
but it's more like two or three every month,
Yeah.
and it's uh, it's definitely disappointing because like there's tournaments that we just straight up have to decline, and
Hmm.
we're not a team like TSM that just they play in like literally everything
Right.
possible. We try to play in as many tournaments as we can, but we're definitely like, we understand that burnout is a real thing, and
Hmm.
we don't want to burn ourselves out, especially before these big tournaments. But it's disappointing to have to like pick and choose certain tournaments that we have to play in just because of like the bloated calendar, pretty much like how
Yep.
many tournaments there actually are. Like, I think by the end of August, we're gonna have played 6 tournaments in like 6 weeks. It's like
Yeah,
pretty
dude, that's
insane,
a lot.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's also I feel like also the more tournaments you get, you also have inevitably lower quality matches because people are not going to
Yeah.
be able to innovate as much because you're not practicing as much
Hmm.
because teams are just always playing officials. So it's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
there's a fine line. You will like obviously you want to have tournaments because that's the draw for spectators and getting an audience and people to watch the game. But you want to have, in my opinion, you want to have the highest quality matches possible. That will draw
Hmm.
more viewership in the long run.
Hmm.
And I don't think that the current ecosystem is like that sustainable for the players, at least. I
Yeah.
think it's not really an issue for tournament organizers, but for players, it's definitely it impacts us negatively. I would say for sure.
Hmm. There's, gosh, there's so much, there's so much more we can talk about there. Um,
Yeah.
I do want to, I want to cut it over.
Yeah.
Um,
No. No worries.
to the crowd. Folks hanging out in the chat, if you have any questions for Shinobi, please drop them in the chat. We'll get them worked in. But again, I do have a couple from Twitter that I'd like to
Hmm.
work in. The first one is from Simo, one of the Valorant casters who has made
Yep.
actually quite the name for himself in the last couple of weeks. Shout out to my boy Simo. Simo wants to know, what agent do you think best suits an IGL? I've seen different IGLs run different agent combinations, and I think it needs to be
Hmm.
explored deeper once those roles become established.
I mean, I guess the most generic answer would be like, I don't think that the agent itself matters as much as comfortability for the caller. Like whatever
Sure.
the caller envisions, like what they can play to the best of their ability or what they feel enables their team. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's always gonna, again, without being cliche, it's like it's always gonna matter kind of what your team composition is and like what kind of players you have.
Mm-hmm.
But from my personal
Right.
experience, I think having played Sage and then controllers and Cipher and things like this, I think an agent like Sova is definitely a lot easier to call on because of the nature of the kit. It's easier for me with our team and how it's designed to call on an agent like Sova because it's an information getter,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think controllers are also definitely viable as an in-game leader because you can set the pace of the execute a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
You can make the argument, I guess, as a duelist as well, but most of the time, in-game
Mm,
leader is not going to be fitting the play style right of a duelist because,
right.
like we talked about earlier, even if like the actual role is not for our team, it's not rigid in terms of like who's doing what. I think agent kits make the game a lot more rigid because every agent lacks something that someone else provides.
Mm-hmm.
Where like in CS, you're pretty self-sustainable. Like
Right.
you can take map control by yourself because you have two flashes of smoke and a molly every round, right?
Right.
But in this game, you rely a lot more. Like you lean on your teammates a lot heavier. So I think there's certain agents that like naturally like playing a duelist you're going to get more frags because their kit is literally designed around
Mm-hmm.
getting kills and being aggressive where other agents don't have the same luxury. So I think there's a lot of like there's certain nuances and things like that that come into play, but in general I think like controllers or information characters are going to be the easiest to call on,
Mm,
but there's nothing stopping saying a really good duelist player that's also a caller, like I can see that being viable.
mm,
um And then like for Sage, the reason I didn't like calling on Sage is just because I feel like her kit, it's weird because everyone envisions Sage as like this hard support, but really when you think about her kit, it's honestly suited to an aggressive player. Like even though like the heal is obviously important for teammates, but there's nothing in her kit that really enables other people on your team. It's pretty selfish utility. Like outside of the
yeah.
orbs where you can like combo abilities on top of the orb, it's not like inherently a supportive ability in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the res, if you want to be efficient and get a lot of reses off, you need to be getting a lot of kills and you need to be getting a lot of orbs. And I think it makes sense. You see these teams that have like this like battle sage meta, like David P on
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
G2. You see Sick, you see Mitch on our team. A lot of these teams are running this like aggressive sage who's more free to take fights, and I think that actually plays more into the kit than having a traditional like support player be the agent just because there's like a healing ability on the agent. Um,
Would you
yeah.
say that that's one of the reasons why
Hmm.
this idea of a sageless comp works as well as it does? Is it because by and large people are thinking about Sage the wrong way?
Uh, to be honest, I don't think Sage's comps are good
Mm.
in the current meta. Like I know they can definitely work,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I don't think that they are. I wouldn't say they're inherently better than a
Sure.
Sage comp. Like I
Sure.
think Sage's value is very high. I don't think it's like insane like it was before, where she's like absolutely mandatory. Like you can definitely make a case for not having Sage.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this like the comp that people are doing, the Sage's comp, like on a set where people are running like two controllers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really just because they don't know how to handle ops. Like they have to compensate for having an extra set of smokes because they're just not
Hmm.
good at using their abilities. Like I don't think the comp is better because of the smokes. Like we messed around with Sage's comp as well, and we just found that without giving too much away, obviously, but like
Sure. Sure.
just
Sure.
Sage, we just feel is very essential for our playstyle,
Yeah.
and we like having the Sage. Not to say that we're like not open minded to the idea of not running Sage in some of
Mm-hmm.
our comps. It's definitely something that we've talked about and we've practiced, but we value Sage a lot. I think she's a really strong agent,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I think using her more in a way to enable getting as many reses as you can in the game is honestly the best way to use her, as opposed to just being like a straight up
Mm-hmm.
support, just running around like a heal bot and just throwing heals to your teammates. Um, but I think the more the game goes on, I think people will make Sage's comp. Like there will be a comp that doesn't have Sage that some team will run that's like insane,
Mm-hmm.
and people will obviously try to copy it and emulate it. But we saw the Sage's comp be a thing with TSM a couple
Mm-hmm.
tournaments back. It's already people are dealing with it, and
Yep.
I don't see it being as viable as people thought it was.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing again comes down to thinking about each agent not just in terms of like what their kit is and what their role is, but thinking about how to maximize every piece of their utility. Like
Mm.
using Jet, right? Like for instance, using Jet, people think, oh, Jet's just like this selfish agent. All she can do is be aggressive and dash and take fights. But you can use updrafts to get information without committing a kill, right? Same thing with cams. Like it's better to use a
Mm-hmm.
cam, and obviously with the camera and the dart, it's like more straightforward because they are
Right.
like
That's what it's
defensive
for.
abilities.
Yeah.
But you can get away with things like that on other agents too that give you information or they give you map denial without just being smokes or being
Mm-hmm.
flashes. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the a big problem with like a lot of these teams right now in NA, I don't really watch EU that much, so I can't really comment on
Sure.
their meta, but I think that's a big problem is people are relying too heavily on the idea of smokes being like how they would use them in CS. And there's a lot more abilities in this game that can net you info and deny vision to the other team than just throwing smokes at them.
Hmm.
Which that's why we don't run the Satos comp. But
Dude, we could talk about this for
to each their
hours.
own. Yeah, no, for sure. We definitely could.
Before I start getting deeper into how you guys think about the game, at
Sure.
least not
Yeah.
on stream, we can have those conversations off camera. Tell me,
Anytime, yeah.
tell me this. This question also came from Twitter.
Okay.
What advice would you give your younger self when it comes to making it, if you will,
hmm
as a professional player, as a competitor?
hmm I mean, being humble is definitely one of the biggest components.
Mm.
Um, that's for sure really important. And I think past that, just being taking accountability and just being accountable for yourself. Like, there's a lot of players that are hindered by their, not to say they have a bad attitude, like they're toxic or they like flame people, but if you're not open-minded to the idea of accepting criticism and like thinking about not only taking criticism, but being able to look at yourself and being like, wow, I did this so wrong. Like this is bad play. Like I shouldn't do this. I need to be better. And like if you win or lose a game, even if you win the game, you're not just like sick. I got 25 kills. I did my job. Like
Right.
I'm
You weren't
insane. Like you're
perfect. Yeah.
always looking for something to improve upon. I think
Right.
is like the most important thing. Like if you really want to be a good player, you're always striving to improve and you're striving for perfection. And I think perfection is something that's not attainable. So if you're always striving for that, you're always going to give yourself room to improve and
Mm.
get closer to that goal. So I think those are like the biggest things I think in terms of like being improved and just being a better player if you're trying to become a pro.
Mm.
Um, and then there's also a lot of talk of like working really hard, obvious things
Obviously.
like putting
Yep.
in a lot of time and watching demos and things. But I don't think necessarily like the amount of time you put in is like it equates to, oh, if you put in a lot of time you're going to be really good. It's more like how you spend your time and being efficient with the practice that you do. Like if you're just aimlessly playing ranked hours and hours and hours, you're not actually getting better at
Hmm.
the game. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're going to
Mm-hmm.
improve to a point and then you're going to plateau and curb. It's way more about you know trying to be again analytical and like again self focusing on self improvement, finding ways to always be a better version of yourself. That's like the most important thing, I think.
Josh, I appreciate you. I appreciate your wisdom, and I appreciate you hanging
Thank
out.
you.
Where can people find you on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter, Shinobi underscore FPS. Unfortunately, I don't have any other socials. I guess my Twitch,
There you go.
twitch.tv/Shinobi underscore CS, but I don't really stream that much. So probably Twitter would be the best way to get in touch with me
Well,
and
you're a busy man when it comes to
see all
streaming.
things C9 Valorant.
Yeah. All right, and then last thing, any parting words, any final shout outs before we wrap it up?
I mean, shout out to you for taking the time to give me this interview. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we can have a talk again at some point.
Yeah.
And shout out to C9, of course, for the opportunity to play with them. Feels good. And shout out to my teammates, everyone supporting me, all the haters. Yeah.
Dope. Josh, I
Thanks for the
appreciate
support.
you folks. To everyone who tuned in, thank you so much. If you're joining or you missed something, this will be uploaded to YouTube, and I'll go ahead and I'll tweet when it goes live. If you have any questions or any suggestions, or if you are watching this on YouTube and you have any feedback on how we can make the show better, please let me know. Drop it in the comments below. And I will do my best to apply it for the next episode of Vandals. But that's going to do it for us. That's going to do it for episode 3. From myself, from Josh, and from everyone involved. Thank you so much. Thank you for hanging out. And as always, have a good night.